Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Published by Greenleaf Book Group. My name is Tanya Hall and today I'll be speaking with Chip Bell, the author of Kaleidoscope and Sprinkles.
Welcome to Published, a podcast by Greenleaf Book Group, where we'll discuss the ins and outs of the publishing industry, from writing a book and finding the right publisher to gearing up for a book launch. And now, here's your host, Greenleaf Book Group CEO, Tanya Hall.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Published. Today we'll shift into a conversation about the publishing industry as a whole, because today there are an overwhelming number of publishing options for authors. They can self-publish, find an agent and get a traditional deal, or work with someone like us who falls a bit in the middle in a hybrid publishing model. So it's important to understand the differences between those options before making that big decision. So we'll be talking to Chip Bell today, who is a renowned keynote speaker on innovative service and customer loyalty. He's written a number of books, including several bestsellers, and his most recent book is Kaleidoscope, Delivering Innovative Service That Sparkles. I asked Chip to join me today because he's worked with all of these different models, traditional publishers, self-publishing, and he's done 2 books now with us here at Greenleaf in the hybrid publishing model. So really could think of no better person to help explain the differences between these publishing options and help you understand the different elements that might make one a fit for you or not. So let's get into the interview with Chip. Chip, welcome to Published.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. So let's jump right in. We've got to talk about a couple of different publishing options.
Good.
And obviously happy to have you on the show since you've got experience with so many of them. So we're going to start with the traditional side, which of course people typically think of as the big 5, the big New York houses that would pay in advance and have some control over your rights and your content. And of course, they bring a lot of distribution muscle into the equation, but they may not always be the perfect fit for an author. So what would you say from your experience are the advantages and or disadvantages to a traditional model?
I think the advantage is, at least from my experience, and I have dealt with a number of major houses, is the fact that they're funding the book, and you get based on sales a small percentage of that. Usually, depending on the publisher, let's call it 15%, but they get the lion's share because they're making the investment, which is obvious. I think that's one. I think a second, obviously, is a big house is going to have a lot of support, a lot of people, a lot of specialists that are under roof that can provide various advantages. They don't usually outsource much because they've got it in-house. So I think those are they do have oftentimes fairly large distribution through distribution centers or companies that do their distribution. I think those are the primary advantages. In terms of disadvantage, I think from an author's perspective is, one, you obviously are going to forfeit some control. Since they've got the major advantage, they're going to exercise greater control over your intellectual property than sometimes it's comfortable. Most of artists are a little bit egotistical or possessive about their work, and sometimes that's difficult to deal with. Sometimes, depending on the publisher, they can dictate terms. So this is the cover you're going to get, big boy, whether you like it or not. And again, it varies by publisher. And so I think that's another one. Sometimes I think, having worked with lots of new authors, their perception is that the sales and marketing arm of the publisher is going to be a huge advantage. My experience has been today, more and more of big houses select books that they think will sell. Obviously, they want to get an ROI. But they don't do a whole lot in terms of the sales and marketing effort. They look to the author to bring that prowess to the table. Obviously, they play a supportive role in all of that. They might put your work on their website or in their catalog. But in terms of the publicity and what it takes to get somebody to buy your book, usually that's up to the author. So you might say sometimes they're more printer than publisher. So again, they vary all over the map, but that's to me, some of the downsides.
Do you think that the cachet that some would argue comes with a traditional house being behind your book lends anything to that promotional effort?
I'm not sure it does anymore. I think at one time it did, and I think for some genres it might. But in terms of my genre, which is business books, I'm not sure people give it much thought whether Harper and Row published it or Warner published it. They don't look that closely at who's at the bottom on the spine. So I'm not sure that's a big a deal in the business world as it might be in the fiction world, for example.
I would agree with that. I think if you ask most people the imprint of the last book they read, they would just look at you like, why would I?
They couldn't tell you.
Yeah, they have no idea.
No.
So you mentioned fiction and business authors. Who would typically be the best fit for a traditional deal, in your opinion?
I think the traditional fit would go best for an author who doesn't want to make the financial investment, who may not have the capacity to make the financial investment in the book's creation. Therefore, it's bringing it to the marketplace, or in the sales and marketing side. Today, it takes a hefty investment in sales and marketing and publicity to get it known and familiar in the marketplace. And there are authors who can't afford that. They've got perhaps a great book, but they just don't have the deep pockets to fund it. So I think a traditional publisher in that sense might be better for them. That may or may not be a new author. I think there are new authors who go, this is an investment in my career and I'm going to make it, as opposed to, a first-time author. But I think the largest thing has to do with economics. I think another one is there's sometimes authors who say, I want to write the book and leave all the other stuff to someone else. That's not what I like. That's not what I enjoy. And that's not where I want to spend my time. And so delegating that to a traditional publisher might fit their work ethic and preferences.
For sure. That sense of being a general contractor can be a little overwhelming, certainly.
Yeah.
And especially if you're juggling lots of other competing
Exactly.
obligations. That's definitely true. So when you think about the flip side of that question, and I know you talk to a lot of would-be authors, is there any type of author that you typically think, this person would not be a good fit for the traditional model?
Those that are, I'd say those that have a fairly sophisticated, savvy sales and marketing capacity. Because here again, I think that's going to be the key to whether you sell books or not. So I think that would be one criteria that I would say. If you don't have it, go with the traditional. If you do have it, you might give second thought to, do I really want to give up control when I've got the prowess, the sales and marketing muscle to make it go? I think that's one. I think the other thing is, does this author have the platform for bulk sales? Mm-hmm. We're all learning very, very quickly that the 800-pound gorilla called Amazon can be very challenging to deal with. And from an author's perspective, from a publisher's perspective, obviously. And so if you look at the performance of most books through the retail world, whether it's Barnes & Noble or Amazon or any other, here again, it's gotten far more competitive, far more difficult, and therefore it's one I would say, this might decide whether or not you want to go with traditional again or a different alternative. And so I think that whole consideration of whether or not you got the sales and market and the platform. You have a platform. If you could sell, how fast could you sell 500 books? Could you do it in a week? And do you have the platform to deliver that? And many people who are just starting out might not have that platform. or some people who've come into a different role. I've been the CEO of XYZ company, and I depended on my company to do all that, and now I'm doing my own thing, and I hadn't built that network. I don't have thousands of people on LinkedIn that I can communicate with, or whatever, social media. Here again, I think those to me would be important considerations in making whatever decision you did for who's going to publish your book.
Definitely. And one that we didn't touch on was timing. I think that's also, at least here at Greenleaf, it's a factor that we see play into people's decisions. The traditional side is notoriously slow, and all publishing is rather slow. And a lot of that is due to the timelines that we're bound to on the retail side. But
that is a great point. I've lived through that and lived through the bad side of that. I had an amazing book that I did with Warner, and the book was ready to go. And the publisher, Warner, decided the salespeople said we got too many titles. And so they delayed the book coming out. And the book had a lot of stuff to do with, it had everything going for it. I mean, I was on CNN talk, Power Lunch, all those kind of, are the best of the best. And Warner was willing to spend some bucks, getting full-page ads of the book in Fortune, in which they own, Wall Street Journal, which they own, but the problem was they delayed when the book came out to the next season, and the .com crash happened, which made a lot of the examples that were in the book sort of obsolete. Mm-hmm. So here again, you're right. I think sometimes with a traditional publisher, you can take 18 months to bring a book out from finished copy to getting out in the world. And some people just say, I don't have that I can't wait that long and still have the book relevant.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And as we've seen, certainly in today's news, a lot can change in 18 months.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So my book, and my book was fun because I worked with Chuck Jones, who created the Roadrunner, and he illustrated the book. The book was called Beep Beep, Competing in the Age of the Roadrunner. It was the very first book that Warner Brothers licensed the use of characters in an adult book, very first one. And Chuck actually, he was 88 at the time, actually did some original graphics work for that book. And it should have been at the top of the list, but when it got delayed a season, it didn't make the kind of performance in the marketplace that it should have.
Mm-hmm. Didn't quite have that splash that you'd hoped for.
No. It was
well, I'll have to check it out.
Late.
Yeah, it sounds
6
fascinating.
months too late.
You've got a track record for doing unusually creative business books. I'll say that.
Thanks. Yes, thanks.
All right, so let's switch over to the other side, if we will.
Yeah.
Self-publishing, of course, has been of huge growth in the publishing industry in the past. I would say the past 10 years, it's really exploded. And for those who aren't, I think everybody knows basically what the concept is, but it's the flip side of traditional publishing, where the author is, as we said, more of a general contractor, sometimes working in a bit of a vacuum and doing the editorial, either handling that themselves or hiring out a team of their own choosing to develop the manuscript, and then typically doing some level of online distribution, whether that's through CreateSpace or Lightning Source or Barnes & Noble's programs. So lots of different ways to self-publish a book. And we should have probably said at the top that there's really no right or wrong option. It's always a matter of fit. So I think a lot of people will sort of look down their nose at self-publishing, but in many cases, when I talk to authors, that is indeed the path that I would guide them towards, just depending on their goals and so forth.
Absolutely.
So Chip, how you obviously, again, have experience in self-publishing as well. And what would you say are the advantages and disadvantages to this model?
I think the primary advantage is control. Mm-hmm. You own all the pieces, you manage all the pieces, and so it's your baby, top to bottom. I think that's the primary advantage. The disadvantage to me is that sometimes when you're most people who self-publish aren't artists, they're writers, and so they delegate or they outsource pieces of it. So they need a cover design. They delegate that to somebody. They need somebody to find the dangling participles, which most writers wouldn't recognize, and so they outsource that to an editor. And so with all of that, you're dependent on your network to have really, really good people who can do all of that. But the downside, which can work, the downside is a synergy. You sometimes aren't managing. You're managing individual pieces, and so the editor's not talking to the designer, who's not talking to the people who are going to do your sales and marketing, who's not talking, and so you lose some of the synergy that might create a better product. And so you have to be the one who brings all those tentacles together in a way to create a whole that maximizes the best of what you can bring. But here again, without that synergy of subcontractor working with subcontractor, which is doesn't usually happen in a self-publishing route. And here again, in much the same way, it takes the economics to be able to make that work. If you want to do self-publishing and have it created in a big way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another point that I'd like to make here is that I often see people who I think they get so exhausted from writing the book that at some point they just want to get it out there. And they say, forget it. I don't want to take the time to find an agent and then wait, the 12 to 18 months to actually see the thing get published. I'm just going to throw it up on, one of these sites where I can grab a template. And I always try to really beat this drum over and over again that book is now becoming part of your brand. It's a piece of collateral that's in your overall brand portfolio, and it's hard to make it disappear if one day you decide that's not the best reflection on my brand.
Sure, absolutely. I tell people, it is your brand, it's your baby, it reflects you. And the way to think about that, and I've used this with other authors who are sort of sorting all this out, and I ask them, how much would you be willing to spend on your daughter's wedding reception? and people go, oh my God, probably whatever it took. And I go, well, you need to think about this book like your daughter. And this book is getting a reception, and is it going to be the kind of reception that's going to make your book proud?
I love
that. And so I think if you, and the other reason I like to use that analogy is this, daughters and books have one thing in common. They're all personal. You wrote the book. You brought this child into the world. So it's your baby in both cases. And so being willing to make the investment in it, I think, is critical.
Yeah, definitely. So in general, I would say some of the points that you made on the traditional side about who's not a good fit for a traditional model, somebody who values control, and we can logically say, okay, that person is probably a better fit for self-publishing. Are there any other circumstances that you think would tip someone towards the self-publishing choice?
I think we've all the ones we've named are the ones I can think of. I'm sure there are others, but those to me would be the primary ones.
Yeah, and distribution too. I often use the example of books that are really highly niche. Like there's a very famous example of a book about how to become a pharmaceutical sales rep that is the perfect type of book to work in an online distribution model, which is typically how these self-publishing programs work.
Right.
Because it's not going to find an audience in the local Barnes & Noble or an airport bookstore. That's just not where it's too niche. It's too
doesn't
niche.
belong. It's too niche. You're right.
Yeah. So those types of titles often are a nice fit for self-publishing. We have one on our list actually called The Lump, which is about the occurrence of breast cancer in men. And it's a very, very, very small percentage of the male population that ends up dealing with breast cancer, but it does happen, and it still is a percentage of, half the country.
It's still a scary thing.
Absolutely. So there is a market for it, but it's probably not in Barnes & Noble. That person is going online to find that very specific content. So that's a consideration as well.
Exactly. Good.
So our third model is hybrid publishing, which is where, of course, Greenleaf falls. And as it sounds, kind of a blend between traditional and self-publishing. And there are a lot of different hybrid models out there, each of which has its own iteration on what that balance is between self and traditional. So I would say that in Greenleaf's model, we try to, and it's not just the sales pitch, but we really do try to take the elements of self-publishing along with the strengths of traditional publishing and combine those for our authors so that they're getting the distribution muscle from the traditional side, the team of experts, and all of that good stuff from what we would say, the New York houses bring, and blending that with the creative control and a lot of the speed to market benefits from the self-publishing side, as well as a larger royalty. Now, Chip, of course, you have done your last 2 books with us, which is awesome.
I have,
Thank
yes.
you.
Yep.
So what drew you to the traditional model, and why was that? Why is that the choice that you made for these last 2?
I think willingness to be. I guess it started with a really basic question, and when I did the first book with you, and I said I shopped to some I'd worked with before, and I said, "Would you be willing to do a book this size that's hardback and colorful?" No, that doesn't fit our model. Mm-hmm. So I think Greenleaf's willingness to say, "Oh, you want a round book? I bet we could figure out a way to do that." It's that attitude, that orientation that I think was important. I think you also, in my opinion, you have staffed the company with a lot of creative people, highly creative people who are in love with what they do. And to me, it shows when you work with them. It's like you feel like, at least, they just can't wait to get to work on your book, or they just can't wait to get to work on your cover, or they can't wait to. And so it is people who are passionate about the work they do. And so that to me is really, they're not just doing a job, going to work, this is what I do every day. They love it, and that comes through. So to me, that was an important feature as well. And
thank you, by the way. That's very kind of you to say.
Well, it's true, and that was at least my experience. And the other side to it is you have a very, very transparent model that is, no surprises, and it is clearly author centric. And so to me, that was important as well. You're there to create. That was my experience. Greenleaf's here to create a book that will make you thrilled with how it turned out. That's our first primary goal. We want to help you create something that you love, you're proud of, and is successful. However, the author might define success. And so, I think that's to me that was the experience and important. So, I was able to bring have the control like self-publishing that you described, but surrounded by experts who said, "What about this?" or "What about this? You might want to try this." And our experience has been this, and so you don't feel like you're alone like self-publishing can be. You've got smart people who've been there, done that, and have a wall full of bestsellers. And so, those were the things that it was the allegiance to the art of a book that I found most fascinating.
Beautifully said. I love that phrase, the allegiance to the art of the book. That's great. Yeah. I'll find a place for that on the wall.
There you go.
So can you talk a little bit about how this business arrangement, I suppose, in hybrid publishing has worked for you, especially as a speaker? Because
yes.
I suppose we probably have quite a few listeners who might either be speakers or aspire to be speakers or consultants. Yep. And as you know, that's a huge part of our author roster, are people who fit that mold. So can you speak a bit to that?
Absolutely. Well, here again, I think the Greenleaf model fits the wholesale marketing side better than to me. That's it's not that you don't play in the retail side. You can go on Amazon and find my Greenleaf books, but I wanted somebody who can help support when I deliver a keynote. And one of the things I always do when I get an opportunity to do a keynote is pitch the book as a value add for the audience. And the good news is they can get them from me and they'll be signed. If they order them from Amazon, they won't be signed. Mm-hmm. I have control over setting how much discount I want to give them because I have complete control over that. And so so it helps me. It is a format that helps me go, here's the book, here's how we'd use it. I think we can do this. We can get them all signed, get it to you. And so you're given a keynote and you've got 1,000 people in the audience and they buy 1,000 copies of your book. You know, it's you got to wait a long time for Amazon to sell that many. Mm-hmm. And so to me, it fit my style. I write books because I love to write. But the second reason I write is it is a marketing tool. And, you know, somebody's considering you for a keynote, overnighting them a copy of your book. Sometimes when you're competing with other folks, it can make a difference in terms of whether you get that keynote or not. And so I don't do back of the room sales. I mean, that is a challenging thing for authors to do unless you got a staff member who can go with you and do that. You never know how many to send, and then what to do. Then you got to deal with how to get them all back to those you didn't sell. And so it's a logistic nightmare. But, you know, I watched Zig Ziglar sell thousands of them in the back of the room, but he had a staff member there that managed all that. And so he didn't have to think about that. Well, where I sell them is to talk the meeting planner into buying them up front and having them available for people at the keynote, after the keynote. Well, sometimes I'm doing a keynote next week where everybody got a copy before the keynote. And so they're all reading the book before they come to the keynote. Now, what that does for me is you got to make sure that your content of the keynote is not the book, that they get completely different content, but based on the same kind of themes. But so, at any rate, it has been a very big tool for me. The book drives keynotes. The keynotes drive book sales. And so they feed on each other. They support each other. And so here again, back to the uniqueness, I wanted a book that was different, that was my whole genre is around innovative service. And so if you're talking about innovative service, you better have a book that's innovative. It looks different. It doesn't look like the traditional book. And so having something in a 6-inch square, hardback, colorful, you know, a cover that'll knock your socks off, you know, pretty inside, great quotes, all those kind of things that help make the book a model, an example of exactly what you're talking about when you're standing on a platform. And so, you know, every publisher can't do that. They all want to do 6x9 paperback. And so that's not particularly innovative. Looks maybe fits all the other books on the shelf, but that wasn't what I wanted. And so here again, the flexibility and the creativity to produce that kind of product lent itself to me to match what I talk about, what I do when I'm speaking.
Mm-hmm. So when you landed with Greenleaf, well, let me back up. I suppose people who are considering an option where they're investing in the production of their books clearly would have a lot of questions on the front end to make sure that they're finding a trustworthy partner. So was there some level of research or, you know, checking us out that you did?
Yeah.
How would somebody vet that partner so that they're in a good relationship?
I think I think, first of all, talk to people if I were an author looking at Greenleaf versus others in the same area. Mm-hmm. I think the way I'd vet it is to pick up the phone and say, who are some of your authors, and let me call those authors and see what that experience is like. And so talking to authors who have done books with you, I think would be a smart thing to do. I think having the publisher talk through how they do what they do is an important thing. I learned a lot because I looked at others that in the same space, and here again, just to me, the most important is getting references. When I was doing my search, I have a very good friend of mine who's in Austin. named Ray Bard. And I've known Ray for 40 years. And Ray has produced, Bard Books produced he doesn't do a lot of books, maybe one or two a year, but his books typically do extraordinarily well. But the thing is, he loves what he does, and he knows the industry inside and out. And so when I called up Ray and said, Ray, here's what I'm looking for, he said, well, there are a lot of them out there, but if I were you, I'd go talk to Greenleaf. And so it is that triggered my path toward Greenleaf, is his recommendation. And so I think here again, it's just one example of, do some reference checking and talk to people who would be knowledgeable and who will tell you the truth. And so, anyway, that's how I do it.
I agree. And I would add to that one point of confusion I often see around not just hybrid publishers, even in some traditional models. On the sales side, a lot of publishers will say that they're going to, quote, make your book available. And that can sometimes be code for, we're going to make sure it's set up in Ingram's warehouse. What you want to ask is, do you have a sales force?
Right. Right.
And those are two totally different things.
They're very different.
People, I get it, that you don't know what you don't know. And
no, exactly.
I really wish more people knew the difference between those two approaches. It would probably save a lot of frustration.
Yeah, exactly. I think I want to add to that is, I think another thing I would advise authors, and you're working with a new first-time author, and his book's getting close to coming out. We've been working together on this book since the early on, Mark Nation. And Mark and I spent hours together talking about the model and all of that. He stewed with what to go and all of that. But I think what I would say, having worked with Mark on that, and again, first time, never done a book before, and new getting started, but do you have a fairly clear vision of what you want your book to be? Not what you want it to say, but what do you want it to be? And I think having that clear vision, you can go with a traditional publisher and they kind of sort of flesh it out for you. I mean, you do a book plan and all, book proposal and all that. But oftentimes what ends up at the end is different than what you start out with in the book plan and with the traditional publisher. But I think when you go with a hybrid, being fairly clear about what you want this book to be, and not that you're set in all the stuff that you've thought, and you're willing to be adaptable, obviously, and adjust. But nevertheless, the clarity. What Mark had, and I use him as an example, is he was very clear about the book he wanted and what he wanted it to be and what he wanted it to do for him in his professional life. And so the confidence around that, I think, said, well, if you really want to roll the dice and invest in this baby you're birthing, it'd be worth looking at. So, and he did.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point and great advice for really anybody looking at publishing a book, regardless of the model they're exploring. Right. Having those priorities in order in the beginning, and knowing, again, who your audience is, what you're trying to convey, how you want to convey it. Just like launching any product or any business, those are big questions that you really need to sort out before you make a commitment to a publishing partner.
Exactly.
So, okay, Chip, you've published many, many, many books, and your books are awesomely creative. So I think I may know the answer to this, but what is your favorite part of publishing a book? When we talk about editorial and design, or maybe it's when you first lay hands on the first copy that you see off press, or maybe it's promoting it, but what is the part that gives you the biggest thrill?
This is going to sound weird, but I'm no stranger to weirdness. When people ask me, well, when's your next book coming out? I go, I don't know. It hadn't shown up yet. To me, and so books just sort of appear to me. That sounds metaphysical or strange and odd, But I feel like it's a gift that's given me that I'd simply take dictation and feel blessed by the opportunity. And it is absolutely, for me, the writing of the book is exhilarating. I mean, it is truly the highest high you can imagine. And so when I'm in the process and that book shows up and it wakes me up in the middle of the night and says, "Come here, boy, we got some good stuff for you." And I used to tell people what it felt like, to wake you up in the middle of the night and say, "Look what we got for you." And you go, "Man, that's good. I can remember that." Mm-hmm. And it punishes you by being a blank screen the next day. So you learn when the muses appear, join them. And so
right.
And so I learned, and it is so to me, I love all the aspects of it. I mean, I love the sales and marketing. I love the publicity. I love promoting it. I love that feel when you open it up and there it is and you're holding it. All of those are great experiences, but the one that's the tops it all to me is the creative process when you first write the book.
Mm-hmm. Well, it comes through in your writing.
Well, thanks. I feel very, 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 like I say, I feel blessed because it's not a religious experience, but it clearly is spiritual. And so there's nothing quite like that.
Well, that's awesome. Well, well said, Chip. And that is it for us. Another episode of Published in the books, as they say. So hope y'all learned a lot from Chip. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been fun.
Thank you, Chip. For notes from today's show, as well as a link to Chip's website, go to greenleafbookgroup.com/episode 9. We have a lot more episodes coming up over the next few months, so please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes.
Thanks for listening to Published. To learn more, please visit greenleafbookgroup.com. And remember to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes.